Hello and welcome to this exploration of the Second Boer War, a conflict that cast long shadows over the history of South Africa and indeed the entire British Empire. I'm fascinated by this period as it marks a crucial turning point in the way Britain conducted its imperial affairs. The war, which raged from 1899 to 1902, pitted the might of the British Empire against the Boer republics of the Transvaal and Orange Free State. It was a conflict that would challenge British military doctrine, expose the limitations of its colonial policies, and ultimately reshape the map of southern Africa. Now you might be wondering why this particular war holds such significance. Well, it's important to understand that the Second Boer War wasn't just another colonial skirmish. It was a conflict that would cost the British taxpayer more than $200 million, claim the lives of 22,000 Imperial troops, and lead to the deaths of tens of thousands of Boer civilians. The war exposed serious deficiencies in the British military system and forced a re-evaluation of tactics that would have far-reaching consequences in the lead-up to the First World War. The Boer War cast long shadows over the history of the South African region. The predominantly agrarian society of the former Boer republics was profoundly and fundamentally affected by the scorched earth policy of Roberts and Kitchener. To truly understand the Second Boer War, we need to delve into its origins, which are deeply rooted in the complex political and economic landscape of late 19th century South Africa. The discovery of gold in the Witwatersrand in 1886 fundamentally altered the balance of power in the region. The Transvaal, once a poor Boer republic, suddenly became the wealthiest and most strategically important territory in southern Africa. This newfound wealth attracted a flood of foreign miners and prospectors, known as Uitlanders, who soon outnumbered the Boers in the mining regions. The Uitlander question became a central point of contention. These newcomers, primarily British, demanded voting rights and political representation, which the Boer government under Paul Kruger was reluctant to grant. Kruger feared, quite rightly, that giving the Uitlanders the vote would lead to the loss of Boer control over the Transvaal. This political deadlock provided the British, particularly the ambitious Colonial Secretary Joseph Chamberlain, with a pretext for intervention. We cannot return home with the stigma of these crimes attached to our names. Therefore we humbly pray that a full and exhaustive inquiry be made by Imperial officers in order that the truth be elicited and justice done. The situation came to a head with the Jameson Raid in 1895. This ill-fated incursion, led by Leander Starr Jameson and tacitly supported by Cecil Rhodes, was intended to trigger an uprising among the Uitlanders in Johannesburg. Its spectacular failure not only embarrassed the British government, but also hardened Boer resolve and deepened their suspicion of British intentions. In the aftermath of the raid, the Transvaal government began to arm itself more seriously, importing modern rifles and artillery from Germany. This arms build-up, coupled with the ongoing political tensions, set the stage for the eventual outbreak of war in 1899. When war finally broke out in October 1899, it caught the British woefully unprepared. The Boers, despite their numerical inferiority, launched a series of successful offensives into British territory, besieging the key towns of Ladysmith, Mafeking and Kimberley. What's particularly interesting about this phase of the war is how it exposed the limitations of British military thinking. The Boers, with their highly mobile mounted infantry and their intimate knowledge of the terrain, ran circles around the British forces. The period from December 1899 to February 1900 was particularly disastrous for the British, culminating in what became known as Black Week. In a series of battles at Stormberg, Magersfontein and Colenso, the British suffered humiliating defeats. These reverses shocked the British public and forced a major rethink of military strategy. I find it remarkable how the Boers, essentially a citizen militia, were able to outmaneuver and outfight the professional soldiers of the world's leading imperial power. It's a testament to the effectiveness of their tactics and their deep-rooted motivation to defend their independence. Such was the day for our regiment. Dread the revenge we will take. Dearly we paid for the blunder, a drawing-room general's mistake. Why weren't we told of the trenches? Why weren't we told of the wire? Why were we marched up in column? may Tommy Atkins inquire. The British response to these setbacks was to pour more men and resources into South Africa. By early 1900, Britain had dispatched the largest force it had ever sent overseas, some 180,000 men. This massive deployment speaks volumes about the importance the British government attached to the conflict. It wasn't just about controlling the gold mines of the Transvaal, it was about asserting British imperial prestige on a global stage. The appointment of Lord Roberts as Commander-in-Chief, with Lord Kitchener as his Chief of Staff, marked a turning point in the conduct of the war. These experienced colonial warriors brought a new ruthlessness and strategic vision to the campaign. The arrival of Roberts and Kitchener in South Africa in early 1900 marked the beginning of a new phase in the war. Their strategy was to use overwhelming force to relieve the besieged towns and then launch a massive invasion of the Boer republics. This approach proved initially successful. By June 1900, British forces had captured Pretoria, the capital of the Transvaal, and it seemed that the war might be over. However, what followed was perhaps the most interesting and consequential phase of the conflict. Rather than surrender, the Boers adopted a guerrilla strategy, abandoning set-piece battles in favour of highly mobile commando raids. This shift in tactics posed a significant challenge to the British. The vast distances of the South African veld made it nearly impossible for the British to control the territory effectively. The Boer commandos, led by skilled generals like Christian de Wet and Koos de la Rey, were able to strike quickly and then disappear into the countryside. This phase of the war exposed the limitations of conventional military thinking and forced the British to adapt their tactics. The vast distances of the republics allowed the Boer commandos considerable freedom to move about, and made it nearly impossible for the 250,000 British troops to control the territory effectively using columns alone. As soon as a British column left a town or district, British control of that area faded away. Kitchener's response to the guerrilla campaign was brutal and controversial. He implemented a scorched earth policy, destroying Boer farms and crops to deny the commandos support and supplies. This strategy was coupled with the construction of a vast network of blockhouses and barbed wire fences designed to limit the mobility of the Boer forces. Most infamously, Kitchener established concentration camps to house Boer civilians displaced by the scorched earth policy. The conditions in these camps were appalling, leading to the deaths of thousands of women and children from disease and malnutrition. This aspect of the war caused significant controversy in Britain and damaged the country's international reputation. The war finally came to an end with the signing of the Treaty of Vereeniging on the 31st of May, 1902. The Boers, exhausted by nearly 3 years of conflict and facing the prospect of total annihilation, agreed to lay down their arms and accept British sovereignty. However, the treaty also laid the groundwork for eventual self-government, a provision that would have significant consequences in the years to come. The war had lasted far longer and cost far more in lives and treasure than anyone had anticipated at its outset. The aftermath of the Second Boer War had profound implications for both South Africa and the British Empire as a whole. In South Africa, the war laid the foundations for the creation of the Union of South Africa in 1910, a dominion that united the former Boer republics with the British colonies of the Cape and Natal. This new political entity, while nominally self-governing, enshrined white minority rule and set the stage for the eventual development of apartheid. For the British Empire, the war exposed serious military deficiencies and led to a period of reform and modernisation in the army. The lessons learned in South Africa would influence British military thinking in the lead-up to the First World War. In the aftermath of the war, an imperial administration freed from accountability to a domestic electorate set about reconstructing an economy that was by then predicated unambiguously on gold. At the same time, British civil servants, municipal officials and their cultural adjuncts were hard at work in the heartland of the former Boer republics, helping to forge new identities, first as British South Africans, and then, later still, as white South Africans. On a broader scale, the Second Boer War marked a turning point in the history of the British Empire. It was the last of the great colonial wars and in many ways marked the high water mark of British imperialism. The difficulties Britain faced in subduing the Boer republics raised questions about the sustainability of the imperial project. The war also had a significant impact on the other dominions of the empire, particularly Australia and Canada, which sent troops to fight alongside the British. This participation fostered a sense of national identity in these countries, separate from their identity as part of the British Empire. In conclusion, the Second Boer War was a conflict that had far-reaching consequences, reshaping the political landscape of southern Africa and forcing a re-evaluation of British imperial policy. Its legacy continues to be felt and debated to this day. As we conclude our exploration of the Second Boer War, it's worth reflecting on its broader significance in the context of world history. This conflict, fought at the turn of the 20th century, in many ways presaged the global conflicts that would define the coming decades. The use of concentration camps, the implementation of scorched earth tactics, and the challenges of fighting against a highly mobile guerrilla force all foreshadowed elements of warfare that would become tragically familiar in the wars of the 20th century. Moreover, the war had a profound impact on British society and politics. The revelations about conditions in the concentration camps, brought to light by campaigners like Emily Hobhouse, sparked a public outcry and contributed to a broader questioning of imperial policies. The war also exposed deficiencies in British military organisation and tactics, leading to a period of reform that would shape the army's approach to the First World War. In South Africa itself, the aftermath of the war set the stage for decades of racial segregation and inequality, the repercussions of which are still felt today. As we look back on the Second Boer War from our vantage point in the 21st century, it's clear that this conflict marked a crucial turning point in the history of the British Empire and indeed in the history of warfare itself. It was a war that challenged long-held assumptions about imperial power and military strategy, and its consequences would reverberate far beyond the battlefields of South Africa. Understanding this conflict is crucial for anyone seeking to comprehend the complex dynamics of imperialism, nationalism and warfare that would shape the tumultuous century to come. Thank you for joining me on this journey through this pivotal moment in history. If you found this exploration enlightening, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Your support makes it possible for us to continue delving into these fascinating historical topics. And do let me know in the comments what other aspects of imperial or military history you'd like to see covered in future episodes.